Welcome to the KA2 Strategic Partnership Final Reporting webinar. The UK National Agency has produced this webinar to help beneficiaries of KA2 strategic partnership projects to increase the quality and accuracy of their final report and help you to avoid some of the common pitfalls Erasmus Plus beneficiaries can make in their final report. By following the guidance in this webinar, you should be able to reduce errors, increase the report's quality, and shorten the time it takes the UK National Agency to process your report and speeding up your final payment. We shall be covering each of the budget headings together with your narrative report and a recommendation on the format in which you should provide supporting evidence for activities undertaken during the life cycle of your projects. Think carefully about your project. Check the assessment criteria in the program guide of the year your project was awarded funding. When writing your report, please give clear, detailed answers supported by examples to make sure it reflects what happened over the duration of the project. The final report should not be the text presented in the application form, even if subjected to some editing modification, as this may lower the quality score and could affect your final payment as specified in your grant agreement. Make sure you read, understand, and answer the question asked in the report form, and not what you think is being asked. In your responses to the questions asked, explain everything clearly and don't take for granted that the United Kingdom National Agency or their assessors will know what you mean. Wherever you can, include figures and examples drawn for the project to evidence the point you are making. Before you submit the report, get other people to read through it and seek feedback. All supporting documentation must be in the English language, or at least accompanied by a full translation into English. Also, before you submit, make sure that all required annexes are attached and that the Erasmus Plus project results platform has been fully updated. The UK National Agency will always seek to maximize the grant payable to you, subject to the maximum grant as specified in your grant agreement, and as long as all reported expenditure is eligible, as per the funding rules set out in the Erasmus Plus program guide, and your grant agreement and all its annexes. The UK National Agency will do this by applying transfers between budget categories where it can remain in line with the relevant funding rules. Please note that where the UK National Agency has to make reductions to your claimed budget, that all recovered or unspent Erasmus Plus funds are returned to the European Commission and nothing is retained by the UK National Agency. Please note that the UK National Agency cannot retrospectively approve expenditure included in the final report, which should have been approved by the UK National Agency in advance. For example, if 100 days of technician time was applied for and approved in the grant agreement for the development of an intellectual output, but the final report claims 50 days of technician time and 50 days of researcher time, the researcher time will be ineligible unless it was explicitly discussed with and approved in writing by the UK National Agency before the expenditure was incurred. An overspend of 120 days of technician time would stand a better chance of approval, even if no prior approval from the UK National Agency was sought, as this would more likely fall within the funding rules for transfers between budget categories. Know your project start and end dates. To begin to be eligible, all Erasmus Plus project activities must take place between your project start and end dates. Your project start and end dates can be found in your grant agreements. Any activity, example mobilities or meetings that falls outside the project start and end dates will be ineligible for funding and will be removed from your final budget. Please pay particular attention to this in development of innovation projects with regards to your intellectual outputs and multiplier events. Now let's look at each of the budget categories in turn. Project Management and Implementation, or PMI for short, is a category common to all KA2 strategic partnership projects. It's a unit rate contribution with the project lead. That is the main grant beneficiary organization, being awarded in units of 500 euros per month, with the other partner organizations being awarded in units of 250 euros per month. Please note that this is per month and not per half month, per week, etc. The national agency cannot award partial months or fractions of the unit rate, and if you include these in your final report, it may either be rejected back to you for you to correct, or the national agency will remove the claim and award the nearest whole number below the claim according to the unit rates. The calculation is a unit contribution as described above for each month of their active participation in the project. For projects with a large partnership, PMI is capped at a maximum contribution of 2,750 euros per month. Over the course of the pandemic, we have seen projects where some partners had to withdraw from the projects, ceasing their participation early. In these circumstances, the PMI contribution will be reduced. Remember, it is awarded on a per partner per month of active participation basis, and it is not possible for any funds for the months that the affected partner did not participate in to be transferred to any other partner. If you request this, it will be rejected. The contribution in this budget category includes the grant contribution towards general project management costs, such as planning and meetings, finances, coordination, and communication between partners. It is also the contribution towards the production of small-scale learning, teaching, or training materials, tools, or approaches, as well as supporting virtual cooperation and local project activities, such as classroom project work with learners, youth work activities, organization and mentoring of embedded learning or training activities, etc. It's also the contribution towards the production and distribution of project-related information, promotion and dissemination, such as brochures, leaflets, web information, etc. Please be careful to ensure that there is no overlap between the above activities and the other budget categories, as any overlaps will be rejected in order to avoid double funding. Transnational Project Meetings, or TPMs for short, is another budget category based on unit rate contributions and represents the grants towards travel and subsistence costs. In order to qualify for this, participants must be able to evidence that they have had to travel in excess of 100 kilometers as defined by the EU's travel distance calculator tool in order to attend the meeting, and representatives of the hosting organization are not eligible to receive a contribution for attending their own TPM. In order to be eligible to receive funding, your final report must also demonstrate the need for the meeting in terms of the number of participants, its content or purpose, and the overall number of times TPMs are held. Excessive claims may be rejected. Their content and purpose must be for planning and coordinating the implementation of the projects, and attendance must be restricted to representatives of the partnership only. Ineligible claims previously rejected under this budget category include meetings where guests from outside the partnership have participated, or where the meetings have appeared to function more as a dissemination activity or a learning, teaching, or training activity. Please also be aware where the partnership may have held multiple project activities at the same time and at the same place. For example, a learning, teaching, or training activity and a TPM. Each activity has its own funding rules, which must be adhered to in full. As it is only possible for people to travel and stay once at the venue, Claims made for the same participants attending both the learning, teaching, and training activity and a TPM are very likely to be subjected to reductions, as otherwise this would be double funding. Intellectual outputs and development of innovation projects. The intellectual output, or IO for short, budget category is another category based on unit rate contributions. Please note that the contributions are per day and not per half day or per quarter day or per hour. When entering the details of your intellectual outputs into Mobility Tool, please very clearly state the date on which the IO was fully developed and wholly complete. This is the single biggest error the UK National Agency sees in final reports, as lack of clarity here has potential negative impact on multiplier events. If you state the completion date of your IOs to be the same as the project end date, then it is highly likely you will lose some multiplier events funding. The funding rules for IOs require them to be substantial in quality and quantity, with proven potential for wider use and exploitation as well as impact in order to qualify for funding. If an IO is assessed and as not meeting this threshold, for example, it is not fully developed and wholly completed by the project end date, then the funding for it may be cut from the final budget. Please note that this is rare, and any such decision is reviewed independently by several members of the UK National Agency staff and management before action. Please also ensure that all IOs are uploaded in full to the Erasmus Plus Project Results Platform, PRP, prior to you submitting your final report. Your report will be assessed on the results available via the PRP at submission, so any IOs missing or not uploaded in full may result in them being assessed as ineligible for funding. Annex 3 of your grant agreement sets out the requirement for the timesheets on which the partnership records time spent on the development of intellectual outputs. Please ensure that you check all timesheets have been correctly completed and accurately record staff function and time expended on the development of intellectual outputs before you enter the figures for staff time into Mobility Tool, and submit the timesheets to the National Agency as supporting documents, because it will not be possible to correct errors once the final report has been submitted. When you submit your timesheets to the National Agency, please ensure that they are clear and readable and in the English language. Please also organize them before submission. This means that they are grouped together per partner and that each timesheet or file is named to tell the National Agency what it is. For example, Spanish partner IO2 timesheets.pdf. If your timesheets are not easily readable or not organized when you submit them, the National Agency will reject your report back to you for you to improve their quality. This will delay the outcome of your final report. If you record time in units other than per full days of work, please ensure that each timesheet clearly shows the total number of days. If you are recording time in hours, please ensure that each timesheet records how many hours is equivalent to a full day. The funding rules for the intellectual output budget category state that they are eligible for the production of the project's IOs only. Please ensure that the purpose of the time recorded is unambiguous and does not represent activity covered by another budget category. For example, both the PMI and TPM budget categories cover meetings between partners. Recording meetings under the IO budget category as well could represent double funding, and the claims may be rejected by the National Agency. Please note that time spent preparing, participating, and following up on activities such as partner meetings, learning, teaching and training activities, or multiplier events are not eligible to be claimed under this budget category, and only staff of the partner organizations are eligible for the production of intellectual outputs. Any claims recorded in your timesheets which do not confirm or conform to any of these requirements will be ineligible and will be removed from the budget. Multiplier events and development of innovation projects. As mentioned in the intellectual output section, this is the area where the UK National Agency sees the most errors being made and consequently is the biggest reason for loss of funding. Please note, as we are making these reporting requirements very clear here, it will not be possible to rectify any mistakes made in the reporting of intellectual outputs and multiplier events, or MEs, once the UK National Agency has completed processing of your final report. The funding rules for multiplier events state that in order to be eligible to receive funding, an ME must be held after the date on which the related IOs were fully developed and wholly completed. For example, if an IO is completed on the 29th of June, an ME held on the 30th of June or later, and before the project end date would be eligible. But one held on the 28th of June or earlier would not be eligible and funding would be removed for it. If you put the project end date as the completion date of your IOs, then this automatically makes all MEs ineligible and all ME funding will be removed. The other important point to note about ME funding is that staff and representatives of the project's partner organizations are not eligible to receive this funding, and the UK National Agency will remove any claims of this nature made in the final report. Please refer to Annex 3 of your grant agreement for more details on how to report these, and ensure that you submit scanned copies of the fully completed signing in sheets and other documentation stated as supporting evidence. Please ensure that the supporting evidence is clearly readable and in English language, or accompanied by a full English translation. Any claims that the UK National Agency cannot clearly identify or verify because it is unreadable or not in English will be removed from your budget. Learning, teaching, or training activities. If your project included learning, teaching, or training activities, LTTAs for short, then in this section you will need to demonstrate how each activity was organized and the working methods used to make sure that the activity was a success. Please break down each activity, any changes to them, and highlight all the benefits that these activities had on the project outcomes and the partnership as a whole. We want beneficiaries to show off what they have done, and this means including the relevant detail in the final report and not simply reproducing text from the application form. If any activities changed, how did you go about organizing new activities, and what were the positive or negative consequences of making such changes? The funding for LTTAs is made up of two linked budget categories, travel and individual support. And once again, these are unit rate contributions. All travel is calculated as beginning at the location of the relevant sending partner organization and terminating at the location of the relevant hosting partner organization. For example, if an Icelandic partner headquartered in Reykjavik is hosting an LTTA and you have a Greek partner whose headquarters is in Athens, then Athens is assumed as the point of origin for the Greek participants sent by that partner to Reykjavik. The request, exceptional costs for expensive travel. This should only be triggered if this has been pre-approved as part of your grant award. This is not an additional cost and would take the place of standard travel. Ticking the box will automatically set the field EU travel grant to 0. You should then enter the real travel cost for the number of participants who traveled for review by the national agency. Only 80% of the real travel costs would be eligible. All travel distances claimed will be checked by the national agency using the EU's travel distance calculator tool. And any claims above the results returned by that check will be reduced to the appropriate distance band. The rate of the individual support contribution for the subsistence of participants depends on the location of the activity and is awarded per participant per day of activity. 2 additional days can be claimed for travel. However, you must ensure that the minimum duration for the type of LTTA hosted is evidenced, excluding any travel days. For example, a short-term joint staff training activity must have a minimum content to fill 3 days. So participants can travel to the activity on Monday, spend all of Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on the training activity, and travel home on Friday and claim 5 days of individual support for this. As mentioned in the project management and implementation section, please also be wary of how multiple activities held at the same time and venue and with the same or with some shared participants are reported. For instance, if a 5-day event is held where each morning is dedicated to a short-term joint staff training activity and each afternoon is dedicated to a transnational project meeting, then this means that the short-term joint staff training activity has only consisted of 2.5 days duration and therefore does not meet the minimum duration of 3 days. And all related costs, including travel, individual support, and any exceptional costs or special needs support costs related to the event would become ineligible. In any case, as the participants could only travel and stay once at the location for both events, then only one contribution to travel and subsistence could be supported. So the national agency would have to reject one of the claims if claims were made under both TPM and LTTA budget categories. Please refer to Annex 3 of your grant agreement for more details on how to report these activities and ensure that you submit scans of the fully completed sign-in sheets and other documentation stated as supporting evidence. Please ensure that the supporting evidence is clearly readable and in English language or accompanied by a full English translation. Any claims that the UK National Agency cannot clearly identify or verify because it is unreadable or not in English will be removed from your budget. If your organization has booked to attend a transnational event during the COVID-19 period and you have incurred costs which you have not been able to recover from the travel and accommodation providers and your insurance company, then it may be possible to recover costs from the UK National Agency. However, in order that we may consider these costs, the following evidence is required. The relevant extract from the insurance policy or policy provider to confirm the insurance policy does not pay out for COVID-19. Cancellation emails, invoices for the flights, hotels, for any claims being sought that clearly show your request for a refund is declined. Evidence should be uploaded to Mobility Tool Plus with your final report. Exceptional costs and special needs support. As opposed to other budget categories, grant awards under exceptional costs or special needs support are not unit costs, but are awarded as real costs. This means that they must have been included in your original funding application and provisionally approved by the national agency in the grant agreement. Erasmus Plus will fund up to 75% of eligible exceptional costs and up to 100% of eligible special needs support costs. For example, an eligible claim for €100 of exceptional costs will result in an award of €75 if approved, and an eligible claim for €100 of special needs support costs will result in an award of €100 if approved. Claims for exceptional costs and special needs support made in your final report must conform to all the relevant funding rules and must be supported by copies or scans of all relevant receipts
or invoices. Receipts and invoices should be in the euro currency, but where they are not, then the euro amount being claimed must be clearly marked on them along with the exact exchange rate used in converting from one currency to the other. If this information is handwritten onto the invoice or receipt afterwards, then please sign and date the amendments. Please refer to your grant agreement, which will outline the only approved website to use when performing currency exchange calculations. These will be checked by the national agency and adjusted if found to be incorrect. All receipts and invoices should also be in the English language. Where receipts and invoices are in any other language other than the English, then you must also supply a full English language translation of the receipts and invoices along with the original. This translation should be from a reputable source. Please note, failure to supply acceptable receipts and invoices will result in the rejection of the claim for exceptional costs and special needs support.
Where relevant, you will need to submit the following attachments. Report Declaration of Honor. Download from the Annexes section. Download PDF. This should be signed by your current legal representative at the time of the report submission. Complete with place, i.e. town/city, dated and signed. Virtual Activity Addendum. This was sent as a separate annex during the project and should also be signed by your current legal representative at the time of the report submission. Receipts and invoices for special costs, exceptional costs, costs for expensive travel, and force majeure claims. Correspondence and insurance details to support force majeure claim. Timesheets for any intellectual outputs undertaken and attendance lists for both the LTTAs and the multiplier events. Please note, failure to provide supporting documentation as evidence for actual costs incurred will result in those costs being removed from your final grant approved. The UK national agency is required by the European Commission to carry out detailed checks on a proportion of the organizations awarded Erasmus Plus funding each year. Primary checks are carried out by our independent compliance team and are separate to the final reporting process. For information on the supporting information that should be retained, please see Annex 3, Financial and Contractual Rules, that forms part of your contractual agreements. All projects are required to retain supporting documents for a period of 3 years from the date of final payment if your grant is less than 60,000 euros, or 5 years for grants over 60,000 euros. This requirement is outlined in Article 222 of your grant agreement. If you are selected for a check, all documents submitted should have a short description and have identifiable and relevant names and be grouped in appropriate folders, for example, relevant activity type. If documents are received and are not easily identifiable, the national agency may reject the submission. If you are asked to send documents that include personal data or sensitive information, please ensure that you use a secure file transfer mechanism. This concludes this webinar. In closing, we would remind you that all the relevant terms and conditions that govern your grant can be found in your grant agreement and its annexes, with some additional guidance in the relevant sections of the 2020 Erasmus Plus program guide. If you have any further queries, then please do contact us. It is far easier for queries to be resolved prior to submission of your final report, or even while the national agency is processing it, than after the national agency has sent the outcome of final report to you. We hope you have found this webinar to be of help and value to you. We thank you for taking the time to watch, and we look forward to receiving your final reports in due course. Thank you.